Art. I'm here today with Jodi Lundgren. Jodi is the coordinator of exhibits for the South Dakota Art Museum in Brookings, South Dakota, and has recently took on the responsibilities of interim museum director. Before joining the museum staff in 2013, Jodi worked at the Visual Arts Center of the Washington Pavilion in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where she served as Curator of Exhibits. She is currently living in Sioux Falls with her family. And man, I didn't know that you had taken on the duties of the
It's been a
of
whirlwind.
yeah. So I mean, thanks for talking to me. It's
Yeah.
amazing. So anyway, did I forget anything? Is there anything you'd like to add to that, or
No, that's a good background.
good start?
It's been
And
the last 17 years of my life, roughly. So,
yeah, that's we don't need to go back any further than
right.
that.
It
No,
might come up, but we'll see.
I kind of yeah. Well, we okay. Anyway, well,
And
so
because I
hey,
did study art in the state before I took those positions on. So really, it's been about 25 years, part of the art scene in South Dakota, really. So,
yeah, you counting going back to
yeah.
the painting studio at
Yep.
USD and yeah.
Yep. Studied with Jeff.
hmm
Jeff and
So that's
Marty.
where I remember you from. I mean, my first memory of you was from um, the painting studio at USD, and then I think the next time I ran into you, you were the curator, or you were working at
Sure.
the pavilion anyway. So,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
okay. So, well, hey, what got you interested in museum work or working in the
Oh,
arts?
so yeah. I like to always say that, I'm kind of stingy. So I went to school on a full ride. It was the Mickelson Scholarship at the time when I graduated. They're trying to keep
Right.
the brain drain from happening. So I was one of those real top students that was offered a full ride Mickelson Scholarship to stay and study in the state. I have to say, I've always been, one of those artsy kids. Always loved making. I had a really strong talent very early on for that kind of mimicry and exact replication kind of thing. And I knew art from that side of it, really. I didn't attend museums like really until, high school, about to graduate into college. So I always had that talent. But I don't know that I would have studied art or stayed in the field if I hadn't a full ride scholarship. I really felt like that was an opportunity to say, okay, I'm an adult now. I can choose my own pathway and my own identity. And I really have always been drawn to art. And even if this doesn't pan out, because you always hear how hard it is to make it as an artist, it's a free education essentially. And it was my hard work that got me there. So I double majored in art and psychology, and I was taking classes in some other programs. But I always give Marty Wenserski a lot of credit because he's the one who was really like, you really do have I took some art classes and drawing and some intro painting, and he's the one who said, like, you really do have some really good talent. We need people like you to stay in this field and work in this field. And that kind of gave me the excuse to make it my major. I think even
Right.
graduating, I wasn't sure if I was going to stay with art or psychology. I've always been drawn to thinking about how we think. So therefore, the psychology and also the philosophical elements of things, like that's just like my nature is to be that way. And so, I got the studio art degree with the double major in psychology, and I started working at the Pavilion, really at entry level, just to see if I would like museum work and decide if I needed to go on to grad school. At that point, I kind of felt like I already knew I didn't really want to be an academician. I love learning, but I love free learning so much more than the kind of didactic teaching what's already been. I'm more interested in the kind of excitement of revelation and these things that, artists love in making work. And so I thought, well, maybe museums are a place for me because I really do like to think about what art does for us. Especially at that time, I'd been reading some great books by like Susie Gablick, Has Modernism Failed? And the Ellen Dissanayake, What is Art For? So all these bigger questions about art's meaning and role. And I thought, well, maybe museums are the place where somebody interested in that can find a place. And pretty much that's what I found, when I started
Well,
working. Yeah. Yep.
like okay, look, just to back up a little bit. You said
Sure.
you were a kid growing up in South Dakota and you didn't have a lot of, like you didn't grow up going to museums, right?
Yeah,
And I think that's more common for most of us that grew up in South Dakota than not.
I agree.
So there must have been, I mean, something that, I mean, was there something like a point, an experience, some kind of thing that happened where you can say, oh, yeah, oh, there's art out there,
Well, I mean,
because,
that's all of college. Like for me, that
oh,
was
so
all of college.
it really wasn't until you got to, you were in college that,
Yeah, I mean, high school
uh,
I really don't think I went to an art museum, outside of maybe something at the Civic Fine Arts Center at Augie locally in Sioux Falls where I was.
right,
I'd seen some things like that, I think, in high school, but I don't think I went to an art museum out of the state at all until I was in college.
okay,
And I do think that is a very South Dakota thing. I think a lot of kids graduating from high school know art from a different perspective. And like my mom was a crafter. She made dolls and things and sewed all of the kind of domestic, arts. That's what I was,
right.
and I did cross stitch, but I also did weird things. Like as a kid, I'd make, now I'd see it as like installation art or process art, words that I didn't have for it then. I was always like, I had paper on the ground and the cement that I would just wet and just watch watercolors run through it and watching what it would do. Like even weird, I think of them as like prototypical, like claymation. Like I'd do Play-Doh and I'd take like Polaroid camera photographs of my like Play-Doh things, change them and take photographs. So, but none of it was taught, none of it was rooted in any kind of
Mhm.
formal learning or exposure in museums. It was just a creative kid thinking about the world, exploring different things materials can do, and then also having that really strong talent. Like when I was in second and third grade, I could like cartoons of Garfield and different stuff. I could draw them like explicitly. Kids accused me of like tracing, so then I'd have to draw it in front of them, saying, "No, I draw these." So
Yeah,
I had that talent, which people get really excited about, and I still, that to this day, sometimes people feel abstraction is so alien and foreign, or sometimes easier than it is. But if they see that you can replicate like that, that's magic, you know. So I always had deep involvement with all of that, but none of it was, until like I got in high school and I was taking some again, I was like heavily involved in academics and sports and music. And so my art classes weren't even in the formal classroom. Like I took some independent study credits, and like there was the first time anybody said like look at art history. Like I remember doing something on Artemisia Gentileschi at that age where it was like, oh, there's this whole field out like it exists. Like I didn't really get that much about fine art outside of what everybody, like everybody knows the name Picasso, Warhol, these kinds of things, but I hadn't really
sure.
looked at it seriously, until I was about ready to graduate from high school. For
Okay.
sure. Yeah. And then college was like almost overwhelming, taking like this entire history on while you're trying to figure out what kind of work you want to make or what you're good at or what your style is or what's important to you in it. So it was like mind blowing for sure.
Okay. And I know that's something I think about a lot, especially watching more YouTube videos and watching more interviews with artists. You There's so many that are, I mean, from larger, more metropolitan
Yeah.
areas, and they grew up going to
Arts magnet schools, you
yeah.
know?
So I wonder how any of us managed to get involved at
It is.
all.
And I think there is I like to it is there. So we're kind of in the wild frontier out here. It's kind of a
Oh,
homesteader
for sure. Yeah,
DIY, resourcefulness. I think there's something neat about that spirit staying here. I think there's also something sad because we do have really great museums. If you look at us, the South Dakota Art Museum and the Pavilion and the Doll, you can get exposure, but I don't know, like my parents never took me to places like that, even within our state as a kid so much. It is really interesting. And I think as with most things, there's kind of a double-edged sword. It gives you some real benefits and opportunities, and it is a drawback and detriment in some ways. I remember going to college and having courses with other students whose like parents were artists and had been trained as artists, and so like generationally educated. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
knew my perspective was so different from theirs, and my
Right.
knowledge level, even though, really intelligent, really capable and skillful, that whole world of fine art and the Western history of art that they just was a part of what they had been and are. I could sense that there was this difference. So, but it didn't, it doesn't, back then, I think it intimidated me and worried me that I was almost like behind. But the
Right.
reality is, I think if you have a passion and you have interest in these things and you have skills, I just offer something very different, which it's all good,
Wow. I thought I was the only one that felt that way.
No, totally.
We should have had a
I'm right
support
there with
group.
you. Right?
Um,
No, it's true.
yeah. Do you get a sense that you're kind of turning some young kids on to art, or
I mean,
maybe
I
making
do
them
love
aware of,
that.
yeah,
Yeah. hmm
yeah,
And that's why I do think that because of that past for me, I also have this kind of inherent skepticism about art, which is almost like, should I admit that? But I do have this kind of skepticism about it. I don't, and I do say this all the time. I find this across a lot of South Dakota's art world, a kind of sincerity and a lack of pretension. Like, people don't want to be tricked. A lot of people don't want to trick. We want to explore and care about and be nourished by
right,
these things. So some of that, and I get this too from like if we work with artists or gallerists from New York, LA, Miami, they're kind of like, people are so nice, genuinely. There's not a lot of competitive kind of game playing, one-upsmanship stuff, and I think that's good. I think some of that is a distraction that you don't necessarily have here. So I think it's a really great place to get people excited about art. And I see that not just with artists, but like with our audience, the community that we are in and the community of people who involve themselves with the museum. It really is a very open, welcoming civic space in that sense, and I love all that. And I love getting, kids excited about art, or, we use visual thinking strategies, which is a really easy way to look at and talk about art. That's the funnest thing to do with anybody of any age. And
hmm
when you see those light bulbs going on in anybody's mind, but especially kids, it is super, super exciting. And I do think that that's what is, like when I look at my philosophy of what I want to provide at the museum, all of that is very much in mind. Like I've always my whole career, and this is I've learned this from those older than me that I learned from. But we do have to acknowledge that we may be the only art museum that a kid or an 80-year-old man or a woman walks into that has been in their whole life. There's a you've got to go quite a bit further away to be next to these major institutions like in Minneapolis and Denver that and so we may be the only art museum. I'm aware of that all the time in what I do, and so I want to speak, and I feel like I need to speak to that audience without. You don't have to dumb it down. You don't have to play to populist taste or anything. There are really great ways to take very serious and difficult stuff and make it approachable, but also show people how some of these things that are really approachable, like the Harvey Dunn paintings, have so much depth and complexity and artistic knowledge and savviness to them, and open their eyes to that too. So that is, I mean, I think my experience is really what colors my vision, and my vision is really well suited because this is where I grew up and that's what I experienced, and I think kids are still experiencing that.
yeah. I think there's a lot visitors can take away from looking at the Harvey Dunn paintings. I know I
Yeah.
was kind of cynical towards them for a long time, and I finally
hmm
made it up there to, I don't know whose show. I'm going to a reception, so I was able to see
Yeah.
them, and until you see them, you don't realize. I always thought of him as an illustrator. Like
Sure.
he
Yep.
wasn't really contributing to the capital A art world.
Yeah.
But the way he handles paint and the amount of paint on the canvas is unreal.
And the
you know?
range of his technique and the way he
Yeah.
would fit it to what he was. Yeah, me too. And
So,
that's the funny thing too about growing up in South Dakota is you hear the Harvey Dunn name, you maybe know the
yeah.
iconic Praise My Garden image, until you really look at his works and explore it more. I've heard those kind of things. I've heard someone call him a glorified plein air painter, and I'm like, you just don't get it. You've never looked at them and studied his work and the whole of his oeuvre and his practice and what he's done and can achieve and did achieve. I mean, there is endless richness to explore in his paintings and in his history and in the philosophy that's embedded in his teachings in an evening in the classroom. It is inexhaustible. I mean, I've been here 7 years working with that collection, and it is inexhaustible, and it is true art. Did he? I love his saying that saying artist for art's sake is like saying beefsteak for beefsteak's sake. So he was very down to earth about what art is and was and should do and could do. Again, that total lack of pretension, total sincerity, total disinterest in distractions that really didn't have to do with the spirit of things or impacting people with your art. It's all there. And that is one thing that since I've been here working with that collection, I'm trying to push to people all the time. Like, this is so much richer than you realize. And I try to draw that out in different ways with different exhibits and show people these different facets. And the depth is incredible in his work. The depth in him as a man, as an artist is incredible.
hmm Um, yeah. So, okay, over the last 6, 8, 9 months, things have kind of changed in the country, and maybe not as much in South Dakota as other parts of the world, but uh,
That's an interesting thought.
um, but like, so how have operations at the
Yeah.
museum been affected? I mean, what can people expect when they go to
Yeah.
visit the museum these days?
So now we're encouraging visitation. So it's been crazy, like it has been for everybody. It's been a complete disruption of pretty much every facet of what you're doing everywhere. We reopened in August of 2020. Our parent organization that we live within is South Dakota State University.
hmm
So we really follow their lead, and they work closely with the State Department of Health and CDC on how to modify things to create a safe environment. And I'm super confident that that's exactly what we've been able to do. We do have face covering protocol. So if people come and visit, they have to have face coverings on,
hmm
and that's campus wide. And we've got these kind of tiered, you talk about the colored phases. That's definitely in place. So they're watching numbers, hospitalizations, deaths, spikes, these kinds of things. So we can always draw back or open up more than we are now. But we've been, I think, in a really good place. And when we reopened, the trend across the world has been that everybody's still sitting at about 30% of attendance of anything that used to be normal. So with the face covering protocols, and we've added hand sanitizer all over, we've got social distancing warning, we have some different ways to channel people as they move through the museum, but we've got big wide open spaces. The attendance super light. It's really easy to go in and have a face covering on and make sure you don't ever get any closer than 6 feet to anybody. So I'm really happy with how it's worked out, and we've had no problems with any kind of spread or contact of any kind of concern through it all. And they lighten the class loads. We do have classes in our museum. We have an auditorium that's a classroom for
hmm
SDSU. So the whole university did everything according to CDC recommendations and reduced class sizes to make sure there were, 6 foot spacing and all of the face coverings. So that has all, I think, worked really well. It was a lot to get through. I mean, a lot in the beginning. We had to develop, I had to develop that operating plan based for
hmm
the museum specifically based on what the university's recommendations were. We had to further develop our continuity of operations plan. Like right away, it was like, what are our essential things? You had to figure out how to deal with all of the programming and exhibition schedule that was on the plate already and adjust everything. Everything had to be modified. Everything had to be changed. So you wouldn't know that coming in now. It's a very safe space. Um, and we've been doing well, but it was a ton of work and a ton of disruption. And so I think that what we have in place is working really well, and we're going to keep, we basically are not hosting, in-person gatherings. We pivoted everything virtual, and but we have the exhibition galleries in the store open so that people can come in at their leisure, and check out great exhibitions and buy. And it's been really comfortable, the attendance levels. So for how much attention it took for so long, I feel like we're doing really well. I say all the time, I'm saying I'm counting my blessings, I'm knocking on wood. You do your due diligence and you care about keeping everybody and everything safe. And
Right.
we've done well. I'm really grateful and feel blessed for where we're at.
Okay. Well, great.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Maybe I can come visit the 50
Yeah.
Works for 50 Years show
You need
before
to
I
see
come
your
to town.
painting in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, can you, so this is the 50th anniversary. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that show?
Sure. Yeah, so I've stacked several exhibitions that all tie to our 50th anniversary.
Okay.
I do have, speaking of Harvey Dent again, in 2014 into 15, I did a show where I put all of our Harvey Dent works on display. I've done that again. So if you come now, you can see 143, all, where
Wow.
two works aren't in condition that we couldn't put out, but pretty much the whole Harvey Dent collection is out. So it is a really good time to visit, and I'll be
Okay.
keeping that up for quite a while. So that was one of the major shows that we were working on for our 50th. And the other one is 50 Works for 50 Years. So that's where one of your pieces in, and I forget which year we acquired that barn painting. Must have been 2013-ish, somewhere in there.
I think
Um,
so.
but I chose one piece for each of our 50 years that we've been open. So 1970, 71, all the way up to 2019. And it's really a celebration of all that the collection is. I purposefully tried to show off the range and diversity and quality of what we have in our
Mhm.
collections. And so that, there's some international works, there's some regional works. We've got a Warhol piece and a Liechtenstein piece, a lot of great South Dakota artists that, people think of as some of the top-notch ones across our history. Some of the very early painters, great American Indian, especially Lakota artists, beadwork. There's an incredible amount of work in that show with those 50 works. And I was really intentional about wanting to show off that range and the quality level of what we have to share.
Right. And then another big show that's coming up, I mean, not only for the South Dakota Art Museum, but for the state, is the Governor's Show.
Yes.
And I think the first reception is in Brookings,
Well,
or
we'll host the
or
first
will there be a
leg.
reception?
You know,
Okay.
our showing is so early on. It's mid-March into mid-June.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're going to be at a comfortable spot where we want to do an in-person reception.
Okay.
Um, I don't know that we're going to be at that vaccination level where I want to have an open, because it's hard to control attendance numbers at that.
Right.
And so what I'm
Well, it can be
considering,
really well attended too, that first
they
reception.
are.
Yeah.
It is. And so I'm really considering right now the best option for that. It will tour for a year, so I'm hoping for sure by the time we're through the tour, there'll be, it'll move to the Washington Pavilion and then USD and then out to the Doll Art Center. So I'm
Mhm.
hoping that maybe there's more in-person gatherings able to be done later on, but I don't know that we'll get one in. What I'm considering right now is asking any of the artists in that show, which is 66 artists, if they want to do like a little Zoom lunch and learn. If anybody's willing, and maybe pair four artists together and just have a little chat and hear something about each of their works like on a weekly basis through the show.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think about a good way to do kind of a virtual pivot with that, because I just don't, and I have to, our capacity limits are definitely contained by the CDC recommendations. And so it's a trade-off of, do you like kind of ticket to have a certain number of people? But so much of what is fun about receptions is not having masks on, having food that you can all pull from, giving the hugs, talking close to people while you're drinking wine.
Right.
And especially the governor's biennial is one of those kinds of receptions. We don't even usually schedule anybody to speak because it's just, a couple few hours. Artists show up and can talk to each other. Visitors can ask questions. And I don't think that we're going to be to the point with this environment where that makes sense right now.
Sure.
Because we are that first venue. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, this was awesome. Did I miss anything? Anything you want to mention?
Nope. Anything you want to talk about, I'm good to talk about. So.
Okay. Well, I think, yeah, this was great.
Okay, good.